We made this.
Hello and welcome to Life's Milestones, the podcast about naming ceremonies and birth, weddings and relationships, and funerals and death, right here on the We Made This podcast network. My name's Mark Adams and I am your host, and I am a Humanist Celebrant. That means that I am accredited by Humanists UK to write and perform humanist ceremonies, namings, weddings and funerals, and indeed other ceremonies such as renamings and pet funerals. Every fortnight I have a different guest to talk to them about their life's milestones, and my guest this time is Andrew Copson. Andrew is the Chief Executive of Humanists UK and the President of Humanists International. And as well as that, he is a best-selling author, having very recently released a book that went right in its first week into the top 10 best-selling non-fiction books. That is the Little Book of Humanism, which he wrote with his colleague Alice Roberts. As well as the Little Book of Humanism, he's also written the Wiley Handbook of Humanism, Secularism, Politics, Religion and Freedom, and Secularism, A Very Short Introduction. All of which I've actually read, because just like Andrew, I am both a humanist and a secularist, and it's an absolute honour to have someone who does just incredible work on my podcast to talk about his life milestones with me. And I just want to thank Andrew for taking time out of his very, very busy schedule to speak to me. Just before I hand over to the interview with Andrew, very quick reminder that any regular listeners of Life's Milestones get a 10% discount on a naming ceremony or a wedding performed by me. When you get in touch, just make sure that you use the reference Milestones. That being said, I'm now going to hand over to my interview with Andrew Copson. With me at this time is Andrew Copson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Welcome to Life's Milestones, and I think you're probably my most famous guest so far, so I'm so glad to have you on. Best-selling author, Andrew. You're not doing yourself a justice, I don't think.
Oh, that's true, I suppose. Yes, that's true. Sunday Times bestseller, I'll always have that. You're right.
Exactly. You're definitely my first Sunday Times bestseller that I've had on the show anyway.
Good.
So, very quickly, to begin with, we do a guest profile, and it is a personal question, but the first one is, how old are you?
I'm 39, soon to turn 40 in this year of COVID, so I'm contemplating what would have been a big 40th birthday as being sort of me and the dog at home.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that kind of thing going on at the moment, and
True.
Have you thought about maybe having a Zoom party, or do we think Zoom's now a little bit passé?
I'm definitely not going to have a Zoom party. I'm a victim of Zoom fatigue. You know, I sit at home all day on Zoom, and I've lost the will to engage with people that way. So no, I think I'm saving myself up to pretend I'm 40 when I'm really 41 next year, which would do me right for the rest of my life, I think.
Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, and you can always pretend, and then you're always a year younger.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, brilliant. So, where are you from, and what's your background?
I'm from Nuneaton, which is a small town in the Midlands that most people know from having gone through it on the train. It's also famous as the birthplace of George Eliot, great humanist novelist, and I was born in the George Eliot Hospital there. What's my background? That's an interesting question. What do you mean, sort of like socially? You mean, am I a viscount or something? Or
I guess so. I guess
well,
it's up to
I'm
any.
not a viscount.
Are you not a viscount?
I
I'm a
am
bit
not
disappointed, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I had a very normal working class upbringing in the Midlands, really. So my grandfathers were all miners or assembly line workers, factory line workers at the lots of cars, of course, Dunlop and Rolls-Royce and all the rest of it in the Midlands. So that's what they did. And I had a slightly different trajectory to my life, because although that was my immediate background and family background, when I was 11, I was whisked off to what used to be the grammar school locally, but had become an independent school, and the government ran a scheme when I was young between 1979 and 1997, actually, if you were from a very poor background, but you scored in the top 10% of entrance in 11 plus exams, they paid for your fees to the local independent school. So I was whisked off in that strange direction, very unusual trajectory for my life from the point of view of my family, and became very interested in more academic pursuits, and so ended up going to university to study classics and ancient and modern history. And so I had a strange mixture, really, in my youth anyway, of a very poor working class background in family terms, but a strange elite education of Latin, Greek and classics at Oxford.
Right, I mean, that already makes you interesting. But the next question is, what do you do that makes you interesting? We've already covered that you are Sunday Times best-selling author. Please feel free to plug your book, but you're also the chief exec of Humanists UK. Tell us a little bit about both of those things.
Well, I became the chief executive of Humanists UK almost exactly 10 years ago now, actually. I've been there for just in that job for just over 11 years, having first joined Humanists UK when I was a student at university, because I learned about the campaigns that they were running at that time to try and oppose the government's plan to expand religious schools, state religious schools in the UK, which I thought was a very strange thing to do. And so I joined Humanists UK because Humanists UK was the organisation that was really speaking up against that. And that's one of the things that Humanists UK does. It advocates for equality and an end to discrimination based on religion or belief in our public life. But Humanists UK also, of course, provides celebrants to do ceremonies, funerals, weddings, and namings, and other life events, as you know very well.
Hiya.
And our celebrants are the best, let me tell you. I know you know it, but let me plug you there. And of course, promote humanism as a set of values, beliefs, and opinions that many people have in this country, many millions of people have, without necessarily knowing that there's a word for it, that they're shared, that there's an organisation promoting them. And so that's one of the things, for example, that I try to get out there in the latest book, which you've kindly invited me to plug, which I wrote with Alice Roberts, and which went into the Sunday Times best-selling chart for 1 week only, but there we are.
Still counts.
Still counts, that's true, actually. Not many books go into there at all, that's true. Which is the Little Book of Humanism. And in that book, the Little Book of Humanism, available at all good bookshops, Alice and I put together a range of different quotes, bits of wisdom from the past, 2,500 years of humanist thinking about life, the universe, and everything, together with some of our own thoughts, and that's really what my life's work so far has been about since I started at Humanists UK 15 years ago, 10 years as chief executive, 5 years before that, as well as in other roles, has been to try and communicate to those people here and around the world who do have humanist beliefs and opinions and values, who live their lives with a humanist approach, that their values aren't somehow second best or parasitic on the religious beliefs they grew up with, and they don't feel a lack of confidence in those views. Those beliefs are a coherent worldview, a respectable one that has a name, one that's widely shared, and one that's made huge contributions to human welfare and fulfillment over the last 2,500 years of our species. So that's the point of humanist organisations, and that's why I love so much working with them. I'm also currently president of Humanists International, which does the same sort of job on a global scale to unite the various national humanist organisations, and it's incredibly fulfilling work.
Yeah, you're a very, very busy man. I've actually had a chance to have a quick look at the Little Book of Humanism, and just so you know, I am going to steal some of it to put in my ceremonies.
Oh, good. That's excellent. Flattery. I mean, we stole most of it ourselves, as I said. From pass it on.
So we're going to move on to talk about birth. And the first question is, when and where and how were you born?
Well, I don't remember it myself. I can only rely on the testimony of others. I was born in George Eliot Hospital, as I said, which was nice, named after a good famous humanist, so I'm pleased in hindsight about that. But one thing I've always been disappointed about in my birth is that So I've said that George Eliot is the most famous resident of Nuneaton, but there is another famous person from Nuneaton who is the TV comedian Larry Grayson. Now, are you old enough to remember Larry Grayson? Probably not, actually.
I'm older than you.
Are you? You're not, but you look so young.
Oh, do you know?
How old are you?
I'm 42.
Ah, good age. Are you actually 43, like I will be, but lying about it?
No, lying on that one, actually.
Well, you remember Larry Grayson, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. shut that door and all the rest of it. Well, he was, of course, not only from Nuneaton, but lived his whole life in Nuneaton, in the posh end of Nuneaton, I have to say, and lived with his sister his whole life. And she was a midwife at the George Eliot Hospital.
Right.
Oh, yes. And my younger brother was delivered by her, but I wasn't. So there you go. That's my sad story, is that I wish I'd been delivered by Larry Grayson's sister, but I wasn't. But I was born in George Eliot Hospital in 1980 in entirely normal circumstances, as far as I'm informed. My mother was very high on pethidine, and I slipped out easily, I think.
So, tell us a favourite story about your childhood.
That's interesting. What do you mean? Something that I remember?
Either or. If someone's told you a story about you that you liked and you want to let people know about, or you can just tell me something that you remember from your early years.
I don't have many memories of my childhood, really. It's a sort of undifferentiated, generally happy time. I'm more of a liver in the present, I have to say, than looking back. So I don't often think about memories of my own life. I remember once trying to bring a slug back to life by putting it in my mouth because I noticed it had gone dry, and I thought that since slugs were sometimes wet, or normally wet, if you wettened them, they might come back to life. But apart from that, I can't think of any particularly appealing stories. What sort of stories do people usually tell about themselves? I bet none of them are true anyway, when other people tell stories about them.
I think there's been stuff about like when they were very young, or a lot of people have said
appealing
stuff.
things or winsome things that they can.
I guess
remember.
If I was asked that question, I'd probably tell a story that I don't remember, but it's one of my dad's favourites. When I was picked up by the doctor, he pressed my tummy and I weed on him.
Oh,
So...
I did that. How funny. I did that too. Maybe this is a general story that they feed you in the Matrix, to make you feel like you had to...
Oh, you think it could be a fib?
I think that's been replicated. No, I did that as well. Or maybe it was my brother. I don't know. My brother was only 2 years younger than me, so there's lots of stories where it's difficult to remember whether or not it was he who did the appealing thing or I who did the appealing thing, in question the story that's being retold. I didn't have a family really that was dominated by children, I know that lots of children are sort of the centre of their family life, and we were obviously well loved and well cared for, but our family was really dominated by old women. We had great grandmothers, everywhere, and grandmothers and aunts and mother and so on. And so really my stories of being a child are all stories of family life, and I suppose I remember the same things as everyone else, being warm, being happy, going to the video shop to hire a video when it was a special treat, being allowed Woolworths pick and mix, and all the other sort of things that happen.
Sounds like we had pretty similar childhoods, actually.
Where are you from?
Wolverhampton originally. I've lived in Manchester for 22 years.
It's obviously just a classic Midlands childhood of the 80s, there you go. It's just, it was all about the Woolworths pick and mix and the video shop. There you are.
Do you know, you're not wrong.
What's wrong with that, eh? What's wrong with that?
Exactly. Do you have children yourself?
No, I don't have children. No. I did consider at one point adopting children and started at the initial stage of that process, but it was so off-putting, the process. Well, no, that sounds a very weak explanation, doesn't it? But it was a very off-putting process, I'm not saying I won't come back to it one day, but it's very difficult if you can't sort of have children by accident or by normal biological means to make the to go out and achieve them through some other way when you're very busy. So no, I don't have children, but I do have 3. Well, you don't want to use the word godchildren, do you? You want to find other alternatives.
Guide parents, maybe.
Parents, yeah. I like sparents, but...
Ooh, I've not even heard that.
Sparents is my favourite alternative to godparents. But anyway, 3 children in whom, we take a special interest by invitation. And I get a lot of enjoyment out of spending time with them, especially now they're a bit older, sort of, between 9 and 11. And that's a very enjoyable part of my life. But no children of my own.
So you said you looked at adopting, but you didn't go through with that. Is that something you won't do in future? You're not planning on any children in your future, maybe?
I don't know. I do like the idea of children, of course. I think that it's a very special thing to be able to give a supportive home and a future and a happy life, as far as one can provide it to another person, and to help that person, grow and develop and take their place in the world. I think would be a very special experience and a very special opportunity, but I don't have any immediate plans to do so. Of course, being so busy in other areas of your life, it's very hard to take, especially hard when you've got to take the active decision to do something like adopt, for example, or seek some sort of. I mean, I've had friends who've had children through surrogate means, for example, and you've really got to put a lot of time and attention into it. And just as I was getting started and thinking about that, a couple of years ago now, my younger brother died very suddenly. And so there was a lot of family disruption and changes in circumstances that we had to go through. We moved house, we moved my mother in with us, and lots of change and reconfiguration in our family life and our home life. So, of course, there's still plenty of time. People these days have children at really what seem like quite advanced ages to us.
Absolutely.
And if you're adopting children, of course, especially if they might be older children, then time's almost irrelevant.
So, right, in theory, if you were to have children,
yes,
do you think you'll have a naming ceremony or a christening or some other ceremony to welcome them into the world?
I would have a christening. I imagine that's your standard question, is it?
That is the standard question, yeah. I'm inclusive on this podcast, Andrew, just because we're both humanists.
Okay. Well, I certainly would have a ceremony, and I think actually adoption, especially of an older child, can be a ceremony can be extremely rewarding, because all humanist ceremonies are obviously very tailored, very specific, very bespoke, and meaningful on that basis to the people that are involved in them. But I think adoption ceremonies can be particularly so because they give an opportunity actually to welcome children who are more capable than babies are of being conscious that they are being welcomed and incorporated and folded in to an existing family. So I certainly would, if we were to ever proceed with adoption, I would definitely have a ceremony. And I think it can be a very useful ceremony as well as a very meaningful one to create that new family and to stand up publicly and say that it's there.
I agree, and I haven't had the chance to do an adoption yet, and I would really like to, because I think the emotion involved. You only do namings if you love kids and you want to be a part of that kind of ceremony. And I think there would be something very special about a ceremony that's written for an adopted child. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I've been to them, and they are really very, very special occasions.
Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about weddings. So, first of all, are you married?
No, I'm not married. My partner and I, we did have a civil partnership in 2011, prompted in a not very romantic way by a political desire to increase the numbers of civil partnerships on the census. And
how very you.
We've been together, since university for, I think, I hope he's not listening, I get this wrong, either 19 or 20 years this year.
Wow.
And that's a very long time. That's almost half my life now. And so in 2011, the decision to have a civil partnership wasn't only motivated by the desire politically to push the civil partnership figures up on the census, although that was the immediate trigger. Obviously, it was also motivated by the same sort of desires that anyone has when they want to give a legal significance to their relationship. We loved each other. We knew that we were the people in whose lives we wanted to share. And so we went forward on that basis to have a civil partnership, which of course at the time was the only legal relationship that was available. Marriage wasn't available. Now, since then, of course, marriage has become available, but we've both agreed that we don't want a civil marriage, and that we're holding out for when humanist marriages become legal in England and Wales, which hopefully will not be too long. We've been waiting now 7 years. In 2013, I don't want to bore your listeners with legal details of marriage law in England, but in 2013, Parliament created a new category of marriage in England and Wales, which was to include humanist marriages, and gave government the power to, trigger that new law whenever it wanted. But in the last 7 years, government hasn't done that, and so we've been waiting now 7 years for government to do that. And when humanist marriage does get introduced, we hope to take that step together.
And we have talked with people who genuinely didn't know on this podcast. I've talked to them about the difference between a civil partnership and a marriage. And there was even conversation about whether we should have changed civil partnerships automatically to a marriage and civil partnerships not exist anymore. Do you have any strong opinions on that sort of thing?
I do have quite a strong personal opinion on it. This is very much personal. Humanists UK is an organisation which, obviously where I work and where I do a lot of public speaking in relation to this issue, Humanist UK as an organisation supported the extension of civil partnerships to opposite sex couples. I had a different view personally. I think that I think the UK should have gone the same way as Norway, which when it introduced equal marriage, disposed of civil partnerships completely. They said very properly that it was a second tier status thing that had been introduced at a time when there wasn't the political will or the social consensus to give equality. But now that equality existed, the time was to get rid of that essentially homophobic institution, which is what civil partnership is. Civil partnership is there because people weren't brave enough to introduce equal marriage. And so that was my view.
I mean, it was a stepping stone, wasn't it? That's all it was.
It was a stepping stone,
but for me, there clearly was an inequality when gay people were allowed to marry, that straight people weren't allowed to have a civil partnership. For me, I didn't really mind. I wanted one or the other, which we eventually got.
If civil partnership was going to remain for same-sex couples, then of course it had to be extended for opposite-sex couples. I just wish it hadn't existed.
Yeah. So, tell me about your day, your civil partnership day.
Oh, right. Well, it was the same day as the protests against the coalition.
Right, okay.
The coalition government that had formed. Now, in any case, because it was going to be a civil partnership and convened, as it were, hastily, we didn't have a large occasion. We had, as so many other people have who've rushed through their desires, we had Camden Town Hall. Because we were in London at the time. And Camden Town Hall is where a lot of people have been married over the last 30 or 40 years of liberal and humanistic sympathies, having lived in that area of London. And so Camden Town Hall is where we had it. We had my mother, we had Mark's parents, and we had the good friends who are the two sets of parents of the three guy children that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And that, I hope that was who we had. I hope I haven't forgotten someone. I'm trying to think now. Yes, but that's right. And then we had Camden Town Hall, and then we went for lunch. And our friends, some of our friends came for lunch. One set of friends came for lunch with us, and the other set went off to protest against the coalition.
Amazing.
So they marched off with their banners, which they'd brought with them. And it was a very special day, a very enjoyable day, and we cried.
Good. It's not a proper wedding if someone doesn't cry.
Well, exactly. Everybody cried.
So do you have any funny stories, other than perhaps some of your party disappearing to protest?
Well, I do hold it against them, actually. I mean, I don't know if they're listening. That she said to me that she regrets it in hindsight, maybe just because the protest didn't work, so she might as well have cut her losses and stayed with us. But I don't think that's true. But they went off on the march rather than staying with us. But
were you not tempted to join them?
No, I wasn't, actually, strangely, on my own civil partnership day, Mark. No. Strangely, I wasn't. I can't remember what it would have been a demonstration about. I mean, in 2011, in March, it was March, so I think it was about the budget, probably, because I remember that the guest in question, I won't name her now that I've criticised her, had a banner that said, "Tax the bankers." And so it must have been something about austerity, mustn't it? Austerity protest. So we did not have austerity at our ceremony. We all went off afterwards for champagne lunch in St Pancras Station because it's so close to Camden Town Hall. And my partner is a train obsessive. His thing is trains.
Right.
And so it was lovely for him to be able to sit in the champagne bar at St Pancras Station and watch the trains come in. And we went off then for a couple of nights in Canterbury, because it was the place that you could get to on the new fast train from St Pancras.
Okay, good.
So that was very romantic for him, but also for me. Although we then did have a honeymoon in Boston, which was very enjoyable.
Oh, amazing.
None of that is funny, I'm afraid. Nothing amusing happened. What, like you mean like the registrar falling down the stairs or something?
Yeah.
No, nothing. We didn't have a big dinner or a big dance or a big guest or anything list. So the capacity for anecdotes is limited.
So you didn't really have a reception by the sounds of it?
No, we didn't. No, there were just a few of us. We had lunch. Yeah.
Right. So no kind of like embarrassing first dance?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. Are first dances always embarrassing? They should be, shouldn't they? I mean, I've been to weddings where the first dance is extremely intimidating, and the couples had obviously trained long and hard for this choreographed moment, and no one else dares to get up because they've done so well. So yeah, you're right. The first dances should be embarrassing, but no, we did not have an embarrassing first dance.
So when you're allowed your humanist wedding,
yeah,
and you potentially have a reception, do you have any idea what you might like for your song for your first dance?
No, I'm afraid not.
You haven't got a song?
No.
No, neither have we. It drives me crazy. He's not bothered.
Oh, do you want a song?
I do.
You want a song?
Yeah. You know how couples are supposed to have a song?
Random. I tell you what, I'll just Google it for you now.
Right.
First song, Mark. There you go. And whatever comes up is your song.
It's going to be Rick Astley.
Well, I think it's because I put your first. It's Marky Mark feat the Funky Bunch. Good Vibrations.
I don't want that to be my song.
It's yours now. Sorry, that's it.
Oh dear.
But I don't have one, and I'm happy not having one. So.
Right, so we're going to move on to the arguably more serious part of the podcast, but it doesn't really have to be. We are going to move on and talk about death, and the first one, are you scared of death?
Am I scared of death? No, I'm not scared of death, no.
Do you want to elaborate on why?
Well, I don't find it scary. I suppose I see death as just a natural process, really, which I've thought about. I mean, I've thought about it an awful lot, obviously. I mean, in the nature of my work, I talk about death a lot. And so I've thought about it, written about it, of course, a lot as well, conversed about it with many people, and witnessed it on occasion, not in the course of work, but in the course of my own life. And so I don't find it frightening in itself. I mean, that's not to say that I welcome it. Obviously, I don't. I'm not, sitting here waiting for it or anything, ready to welcome it as a friend, as some people who are suffering might be. I'm at peace with it, I suppose you might say. I've thought about it, what it is, what it means, what it will be, and so on. And having thought about it, I've made my peace with it, and try to think about it when I do think about it as being something that is a natural end to what will hopefully have been a good life. And that's the position that death plays in my mind, for my own thinking about the world. Being dead, of course, is a difficult thing to think about anyway, because it's once you're dead, you don't exist anymore. So I suppose it's like, have you ever had a general anaesthetic, been under for an operation?
I have. It was weird.
Right. And so you open your eyes and it's like you don't believe that you have been unconscious, right? Because no time has passed, and you feel that you temporarily have ceased to exist. Well, obviously that's what death is like, really, right? Okay, apart even more so. So you're literally unaware of being dead. You've ceased, you've ended, you've terminated. So of course, being dead has never worried me. I don't worry that there's a hell waiting for me, that, what 1 second after I close my eyes in death, I'm going to open my eyes in a fiery pit, because I've been so naughty. So, I mean, that's good, right? I don't fear death in that sense. I don't fear being dead. Of course, I hope that dying won't be too traumatic. One can have concerns and worries about that it might be painful, it might take place in difficult circumstances or be drawn out or whatever, and you worry about other people in that respect as well, how they will be affected by it. But death itself, as a feature of my life, does not frighten me.
No, it makes complete sense. The next question, you have actually touched on this very briefly when we were talking about adoption, but have you experienced the death of a loved one?
Oh, I've experienced a lot of death, unfortunately. I said at the beginning when I was growing up that I had a very large family when I was a child, and that's true. All my great-grandparents were still with us, my grandparents were still with us, my extended family broadly. But with the death of my brother 2 years ago, that left, after a very bad few years, just me and my mum. Because my father died, although my parents were divorced. My father died in 2010 at the age of 53, and that's quite young, obviously, these days.
That's very young.
Yeah. And then in 2016, we had a very bad. Well, everyone had a bad year. Well, lots of people had a bad year in 2016. Obviously, it was the EU referendum. But the I had an extra bad year.
Yeah.
In that firstly my grandmother died, with whom I was extremely close, and she and my grandfather and my mum were really my parents when I was growing up, and so I was very close with her. Sort of speak to her on the phone every other day or so, right up until that point.
Yeah.
So firstly she died in 2016, and then see if I get the order right, and then her son, my only uncle, my mum's only brother, died again quite very young, and then my great aunt died, who again was closer than that might sound. She had lived with a house fell on her during the war, during the Blitz,
Right.
and for the rest of her life she had quite not very, very severe, but severe learning difficulties that had meant that she had lived firstly with my great grandmother, and then once my great grandmother had died, which was about 20 years ago, one of my great grandmothers, she lived, this great aunt of mine, with her care fell to my grandmother and then to my mother, and so she died also in that same year, and then my grandfather died the next year.
Good
and
grief.
and then a few months later my brother died, which was obviously he died very young, 2 years younger than me, so he was 34 when he. Is that right? Yeah.
That's
34.
so young.
And so in just 2 years there was a sort of a holocaust of Copsons, really, and they all disappeared. And I saw some of them die, as I saw my great grandmother die 20 years before. I saw all of them dead, and had to identify my brother's body, unfortunately, when it was repatriated to the UK because he had died abroad. So I'm really quite familiar with seeing dying and seeing death and seeing the dead, and yes, it's quite a familiar prospect to me.
Do you feel like the experience that you've had in that kind of area means that we talked about how comfortable you are with the concept of death? Do you feel that in a weird and obviously unpleasant way it's actually helped you to understand death more, seeing it as much as you have?
Well, maybe. I mean, I think I felt that way anyway, and I suppose we all see what we want to see when we see these things, and we end up with, confirmation bias as a terribly strong force in our brains. So
True.
when we see things, we tend to think, oh yes, that confirms what I've always believed. But certainly, I think seeing people die, for me at least, it definitely confirms what I said about death being the end of us. Because I think it's really difficult, when the moment when someone dies and they go from being alive to being dead, it's just so obvious that they've ceased to be. It seems so obvious to me that everything that was real about them, everything that was animating, everything that was the person that they were, it's just switched off at the point when the body dies. Now, I suppose if you thought then that their soul could go elsewhere, then you might go and say, oh, that's the point when the soul leaves the body. But up until that point, the person is so intimately connected with the body, and it's so obvious to me that the body is the person and vice versa, that I suppose what seeing death has confirmed for me is that it is the end of our personal existence, and that therefore there's nothing frightening about it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mark some transition to some other place. No. That's fearful. But equally, I mean, it's not very pleasant. There's no pretending that dying is incredible fun, and the best thing. I wish I could do it every day. Absolutely not. And it can be very traumatic. It can be very painful. It can be very painful for people who are watching it obviously happen. And we just have to hope that we can reduce the pain of the moment for everyone as much as possible. And of course that can be done. I was fortunate in everyone I've seen die has done so in incalculably greater comfort than people would have done 200 years ago.
Right.
They're assisted by, first of all, obviously by every dying person's friend, morphine,
yes,
which is a fantastic thing, and also by incredible care, medical care and social care, and in my case as well, familial care, from family around them. But nonetheless, it's not nice. It's not what you would want to go through on a daily basis, like I say. And I think we have to be realistic about that and sort of grow up about it a bit. I mean, everyone is going to die. And however fantastic the bit between birth and death is, death is coming, and it isn't going to be pleasant. So I think that just being realistic about that's quite important as well. But in terms of your question, I don't know. I don't think it's changed very much my fundamental feelings about this. I think it's confirmed them. I suppose what it has given me is I was never fearful of it, but in addition to not having any fear of it conceptually, which I didn't have anyway, I now don't have any fear of it. The sort of fear you have about the unknown. Yeah. You can say, oh, I'm not afraid of X, Y, and Z, having never experienced or seen it. But then you only really know if you're right about that when you do sort of see it. And there is a sort of fear that comes from a lack of familiarity, isn't there? And so I think if you're more familiar with death, having seen it and encountered it, then that helps to dispel the sort of fear that creates taboos or fear of the unknown. So I suppose, yes, those experiences have probably played their part in dispelling that type of fear from me.
Right. So we're going to talk about your funeral.
Oh dear.
Well, not necessarily. Well, we're not suggesting it will happen soon, but humanist funeral training suggests that you should think about your own funeral. And I could answer all these questions. I couldn't have done before my training, but I can now. So the first one is, do you want to be buried or cremated?
I wish to be. Actually, I don't. I know everyone says this, but and they don't necessarily mean it. But I actually don't mind. I'd either like to be buried or have my ashes scattered in the field at the end of the garden. That's what I feel quite strongly. But I don't actually mind which of those it is. Okay.
The garden of your current home?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what
the place that we fell in love with, really, and where we've moved now, and just since my brother's death, and with my mum, and I think that. I like to think that this would be the place where we live really much for our whole lives now, because it's that sort of place, and so that's what I would like. But I don't know. Do you know whether you want to be cremated or buried?
I do. I think cremation is for me. I don't know if it's fair, but I tend to associate burials more with faith than not.
Well, of course that is normal now. I mean, in Britain now. Not in Northern Ireland, but in Britain, obviously almost all burials are religious because most people are cremated, because that's the default. You have to have a special reason not to be. Yeah. And that is almost always the religious reason, so a Catholic or a Muslim or Jewish or whatever. But of course, especially the growth in woodland burial has given a new reason for humanist inclined non-religious people to have that sort of burial. In fact, that's what my grandmother had, and I think that I wouldn't mind that. But I'd do whatever's the most environmentally friendly. I don't know which that is. Probably burial, maybe.
I think it's cremation.
Is it? Oh, fine. You convinced me. I don't really mind. I'll be cremated and then I'll be scattered. Yeah, in the field.
I did a burial funeral in a Catholic plot not so long ago. So they had this Catholic plot that this family had had for forever, but these people didn't have faith. So they asked me to do their funeral. And I was like, can I do this? When I spoke to the fellow that worked at the crematorium. And he was like, I hope so, because you're booked to do it. So, even the religious plots don't necessarily have religious people in.
That's interesting, isn't it? I didn't know that was possible.
Well, I didn't until I turned up.
It happened now anyway. They can't dig them up.
No, exactly. I bloody hope not. So, have you any idea of a reading that you would like to be read at your funeral? Perhaps something from the Little Book of Humanism?
Well, why not the whole thing? Just read cover to cover. I think that would be the best solution. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose. I haven't thought about it, but maybe I would like something read from something I've written myself, actually. I don't know. That's a nice idea. It's a good point. I like Bertrand Russell, of course, about, that famous passage about the life well lived being like the river that feeds into the sea, and that idea of thinking about your existence like that. That's a good passage. I quite like I read a quite moving mini essay, I think it was started as a newspaper column, by the philosopher Anthony Grayling at my brother's funeral, about grief and sorrow, and how those that are dead would want us to mourn, not too much and so on, and what would it's quite a that's quite a good reading. So I'd like that. I think really, funerals are obviously, as we all know, not for the dead but for the living, and so I do think it's good in funerals to have readings and reflections which offer something to the grieving, rather than necessarily are about the preferences of the person who's died. Of course, readings that are related to the character of the person who's died can offer resources for grieving, for those who are still alive, of course, as well. But I think something on A.C. Grayling's work on sorrow, something maybe Bertrand Russell about life giving into the sea and so on. I like those two readings very much.
Yeah, they're very, very lovely. And the last one is, what music tracks would you select for entrance, reflection and exit for your funeral?
Joe, I haven't thought about entrance, actually. I think that I'm afraid I don't know. I'll have to think further about that and get back to you in a few years when I've when I've developed my thinking. For reflection, I want Brahms Sextet No. 1 in B flat.
Lovely.
I like Brahms in general, and I think it's good for reflection. And I think it'd be a good piece because it moves most people to tears, and I do want people to be able to cry, for halfway through. I think that's important. I remember with my brother, we had Danny Boy for his reflective piece, and that's absolutely guaranteed to sort of purge your grief, your tears, and I think that's really important, actually. Which, whenever the moment is in the ceremony, to have that. That's just a personal belief of mine, and I think it's my funeral, so people can have what I think's good for them, and I think that would be good for them if they had a good cry at that point. So, a bit of Brahms. Also, that happens to be the piece that I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan, but there's an episode in the Star Trek Next Generation when Sarek, the old Vulcan ambassador, appears as a character, and he's got a sort of Vulcan dementia. Vulcans don't show emotion, you see, but he's got a sort of Vulcan dementia, and one of the ways they find out is because during a recital at which this bit of Brahms is played, he sheds a tear.
I do remember that.
You remember it? Well, that's the one. That's the piece. And so, if it can make a Vulcan cry, it can certainly do the same job for the mourners at my funeral. That's my reasoning. So, I'll have that.
Okay.
And on the way out, I want Yazoo, Only You.
Oh, what a gorgeous song!
It's a lovely song, and it's a song about love, which is what life's all about, And so I think that's a good end.
I mean, talking about crying, when I had perhaps more of the naughty waters than I should have had, but when I saw Alison Moyet at Manchester Pride, I just cried because she was so bloody brilliant.
Yes, that's in general a good thing about anything by Yazoo, of course.
Yeah, that's a lovely choice. I love Yazoo and I love Alison Moyet. Good choice.
Well, I think you're gonna steal it now, are you?
Yeah.
Just of humanism.
So, Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Life's Milestones. Where can people find you on the internet?
Oh, I don't know. Twitter?
Yeah, wherever you want people to find you.
I suppose Twitter's the best place, at Andrew Copson.
Mm-hmm.
Come and say hello there, and I'll tell you to buy my book.
Good. And where can people get your book?
Everywhere. That you can get it from your local bookshop. Waterstones has got a good couple of thousand copies in stock, I happen to know, at least at the date of recording this. And if you're not averse to their working practices, then Amazon, of course, is the place that can get it to you the quickest. But some people that have ethical concerns, and so your local bookshop or Hive. There's this great website, hive.co.uk, where you buy a book from them, and they make a donation to your local bookshop.
And do you have your own website, or would you just direct people to the Humanists UK website?
I do have a website, actually, andrewcopson.com, where there's some blogs and information about some of the other books. But, of course, the main website that everyone should spend their life exploring is humanists.uk. So humanists.uk is the website of Humanists UK and is well worth a visit.
Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your life's milestones with me.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say one more time, thank you so much to Andrew Copson for taking time out of his incredibly busy schedule to speak to me about his life's milestones. In fact, This same week as he spoke to me was the launch of the UK Freedom of Religion and Belief Forum, of which he is a steering group member. The forum is designed to uphold freedom of religion and belief for everybody. And I've never made this podcast about interviewing humanists. I've always said that I want some diversity. But the reality is I am a humanist, and while I'm talking about Andrew and the great work that he does, you might want to have a look at the other humanist campaigns that Humanists UK do. If you have a look at humanism.org.uk, you'll find information about their campaigns on illegal faith schools, secularism in Britain, human rights, marriage equality, the reformation of RE classes, assisted dying, conversion therapy for gay people, which, if you didn't know, is still legal in this country, and unelected bishops in the House of Lords. In a couple of days, I will be updating the playlist with all of Andrew's choices. And that's about it. Thank you so much for listening to Life's Milestones, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Life's Milestones is a podcast by me, Mark Adams. Follow me on Twitter at MarkAdamsHC. That's also my handle for Instagram. If you're looking for my website, it's www.humanist.org.uk/Mark Adams. If you're looking for my Facebook, it's Mark Adams Humanist Celebrant. All the information on how to use me as your celebrant is there. The show's social media is at Life's Milestones on Twitter. Other than that, I am just using my celebrant contacts for the show. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast.
There's just this moment, and I can see it in my head now, of complete glee that Scully has on her face as they dive in to open their presents. And it's the camera's moving away from the scene. It's not even like a huge close-up, but just her choice in that moment as an actor is just superb to give us that sense about what their dynamic is. I love the... I said it earlier, I love the kind of almost holding fingers moment at the end of Field Trip is beautiful.
Right in the childhood.
Mark, you heard the bell. We better get back to the podcast.
Really?
Yeah. I thought, keep with the theme.
Keep with the theme.
Keep with the theme, recess, school stuff. Did you know, I didn't talk about this before. So, like in primary school and in high school, in all kinds of school, you have a break, you have a 15-minute break, then you have a lunch.
Yeah.
I feel like I was the only kid in my schools to ever call that first break recess.
That's because you're not American.
But, what else do you call it? Break.
Break and lunch.
I've decided after rewatching this that my breaks now in work are going to be called recess.
Mine are not going to be called recess.
Cerebral Jukebox.
I thought that Stevie Nicks was a boy and that Lindsay Buckingham was the girl who was singing on it. So, because I just assumed by their names that was the way around it went. And then when somebody else told me I looked like Stevie Nicks, I was like, thanks, I guess I'll grow my hair.
How dare you?
Yeah, it was big burly man.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.